Thanks a lot for tuning in. And I'm now in my top two science fiction fantasy films of 1980. And holy skunk sweat, it's Superman 2. Now, first, I feel there's something going on with my voice here today. Notice that once I got up, I feel like General Zod's got control of my throat or something here. But anyways, this we're gonna talk about Superman 2, the first sequel to the original Superman. Um, now, just a couple days ago, I finally got around to seeing the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. Now, when it was released, uh, it was directed, or the credit, he did end up directing most of the film, but it went to Richard Lester. Um, But I did just see the Richard Donner cut, and it seemed like there was a great swell of people saying it was a much better film. And the original film, like the Superman 2 Richard Lester version, I don't know how many times I've seen it. 20, 25 times. It's one of the films that is nostalgic. I remember taping this off, I think it was ABC some night way back in the late 80s or early 90s, and I just watched it. I love the film. It's I think really well paced. Just keeps moving, keeps motoring. Um, where the first one, it was a slower pace. It was sharing the story of Superman. Um, but this one moves along, I think, at a little better pace. So um, now, as I said, the original Superman 2 was directed by Richard Lester due to Richard Donner was fired. Um, he actually had filmed 75% of Superman 2 when the producers Peter Spangler and Alexander and Ilya Salkind came in and fired him. I'll get to more of that later. Now, this film was released in Australia on December the 4th, 1980. So one day before Flash Gordon uh, in the States. Now, what Warner Brothers, well, I'll say this first. In the United Kingdom, it was released April the 9th, 1981, and not until June 19, 1981 in the States. Now, why in the world did they do this? Were they afraid of competing against Flash Gordon and Popeye? No. Warner Brothers had decided to release this film during like the height of film viewership in those particular countries. So that's when they released it, and they hit a home run in doing so worldwide. Now, originally Superman was based on the comics by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, released in 1938. Um, Now, the story of the film, much like the original Superman, was by Mario Puzo, who wrote The Godfather. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe when he originally wrote it, it was all like one continuous story, and it was massive in length. But he wrote the original screenplay or the story for the film. And then screenplay credits go to Puzo as well as David and Leslie Newman. Now, both of the Newmans ended up writing for Superman 1, Superman 2, and Superman 3. Um, Now, David was also one of the writers for the amazing classic Bonnie and Clyde, along with Robert Benton, who also was one of the writers of Superman 1 as well. So that I find that interesting, as well as Robert Town also was one of the writers of Bonnie and Clyde as well. Um, uncredited Tom Mankiewicz, but he did get credit as creative consultant. Um, he also did uncredited writing for the first Superman, as well as a few great James Bond flicks, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun. I generally like almost all Bond movies, but so now, unfortunately, there's a lot of backstory to this, a lot of bickering and fighting, and as I said, Richard Donner got canned, which, in my estimation, wasn't the best choice. They should have tried to continue on, but maybe maybe that was too big of a task to uphold for these guys. But way back in 1977, the producers, the Salkinds, decided to film part one and part two back to back. Um, so so there wouldn't be as much of a gap between the release of the first and second film, although in the end there was, due to the you know firing of Richard Donner and bringing on Richard Lester. I'm not sure exactly how much time um, was spent due to that, but as I said, tensions rose when Donner and the producers got into tensions between each other. Um, Now, the filming of Superman 2 stopped so that they then would work on completing and releasing the first Superman. So the plan kind of changed midstream there. Um, and then once Superman was released to theaters in not much time, Richard Donner was fired. And as I said, he had filmed 75% of Superman 2. Um, and then there was I think, an interview with Margot Kidder, who said that Donner had completed enough of this film that he could have his own version released, and then that's what happened. They found his version of Superman 2, everything he had filmed, and Donner had came back in, and they pieced it together. And yeah, I would say it is better. I definitely look at it as incomplete as well. Um, it's a much better marriage to Superman, even though the Lester film totally is very much a sequel. It's very, you could play them back to back and it's one continuous story. But Donner's version is even married to it even better, I think, and it makes more sense, and it kind of, from what I know, may follow the Superman comics closer, or the backstory of Superman. Now, when I was a kid, I did read a little bit of Superman. I do have Superman comics, but I wasn't like a huge Superman fan with comics and knew everything about him. But yeah, so um, but then after Donner was fired, Richard Lester was brought on board, um, who was actually there as like a go-between between Donner and the producers. Um, I believe in the first Superman, like there was fighting throughout that film as well. Um, so he was brought on to direct the rest of this film. And Lester had directed many films in his career, including a Hard Day's Night by the Beatles back in 1964. He also would go on to direct Superman 3, released 2 years later in the States in 1983. Um, and an interesting note as well, just 2 days after the release of Superman, Marlon Brando sued the Salkinds for 50 million bucks. That's a lot of money back in 1978. Um, as he was stating he was not receiving the percentage of the gross for the box office returns. Um, in return, Brando received 15 million from the Salkinds. Um, and then they stated that they what he had filmed for Superman 2 would not be released because they don't want to give him a percentage of the next film. And it would have been actually 11.75% of the gross uh, in the United States for that box office, and that would have been mega money. Um, so they decided to go with Susanna York, who was Superman's mother, and have her in the place of where Marlon Brando was in Superman 2. And yes, it works in Lester's version. I always wondered, even as a kid, I was like, how come it's not Marlon Brando? Well, now I know. Um, but in Donner's version, it's certainly extended. It definitely it definitely uh, hits a deeper rut within the emotion of the story. Because definitely Jor-El, who Marlon Brando plays, definitely has a history of the villains of Superman 2, where Superman's mother doesn't really. Her husband did. Um, so it definitely works better with Brando in that performance. But fighting and bickering, that's what happens. Now, due to the decision of firing Donner, Tom Mankiewicz did not return due to his loyalty to Donner. He felt um, it would be best if he didn't work from that point on Superman 2. Editor Stuart Baird waved at editing Superman 2, and as well Gene Hackman, who plays Lex Luthor, and has decided not to return for reshoots. He was, I guess, not pleased with the decision in the firing of Donner. Now, it was at this point that the Newmans were brought in then to retool the script. And there was definitely some differences. I'm going to go over them later in a little bit. Differences between the Lester version and the Donner version. And I'm going to try my best to try and share with you the things that I love about this film. And not just give you story that you can find yourself, um, but anyways, John Williams was actually supposed to come in and do Superman 2 theme or the score once again, but he was replaced by Ken Thorne, who had worked with Lester quite often in the past, um, and he would return to do the score to Superman 3 as well. Um, Now I'm not sure exactly what other films Thorne had done with Lester, but uh, they had worked together in the past for sure. So now, in hearing both of the scores, it's unfair to Thorne because it's a John Williams score that he's stepping in and just sort of adding his flair to that score. But Williams' score is better. The score to Superman, it's interesting because to me, it is one of my favorite scores of all time. Um, and certainly when looking at Williams, it's it could be for him maybe my top three of his, although it is similar to Star Wars, which was released just like a year before Superman. So I never looked it up, but they might have been like back to back films that he did. They're very similar, but geez, I just love the build up of Superman, and like that's I'm going to review it at some time, the original Superman, but that's why I just absolutely love the opening to Superman, with this kid reading a comic, and then you're just, thrown out into space, and the music starts, and the build up, like, oh, it's amazing to me. And then when you hear uh, the score in its triumphantness, I just imagine Superman flying and saving the world. And Christopher Reeve. I just see him flying through the air as the superhero. So it's a terrific score to me. I love it, and always brings a smile to my face, and I feel like I'm 10 years old when I hear it. So, and I would say as well, when I saw the Richard Donner cut just a couple days ago, watching it, man, I felt like I was 10 years old again. And it's got that same opening credit sequence, but man, it's about a quarter shorter. Definitely the original Superman over the course of time. That credit sequence is too long, but it's cut down. Um, but it's the same kind of opening, more or less, setting the story up for you. Um, so yeah. Now, the film, when it was released, and I imagine due to um, the firing of Donner, bringing Richard Lester in, and Lester then needing to refilm what has already been filmed because Richard Donner did not want to share credit. And for Lester to receive loan credit for the film, he had to shoot, I think it was 60% of the film. So he had to go over and reshoot stuff. So in my mind, the budget must have just skyrocketed a bit due to this, due to that what happened there. But it had a budget of $54 million, which in today's world, that's not all that large. But when you put that into today's dollars, that would be a budget of $200 million if that was film was made today. And a recent film I looked up that had that budget around there was The Flash. Um, Now, the box office take back in when this film was released was $190.4 million. So, as I said, yeah, they hit a home run on this one. They did real well. And in today's money, when converting that, um, that would their box office take would be just over $705 million. A recent film that grabbed that was the Black Panther. So it really did really well. Like yeah, got over three times what it put into the film on the budget. So they did really well. Now, when it was released in North America, in the States and Canada, 1981. So it's not 1980, although I'm releasing it then because it was released in Australia then. In 1981, it turned out to be the third biggest film of 1981, behind in second place on Golden Pond, which I admit I have not seen. I would like to, um, starring Henry Fonda and Jane Fonda. But the number one film, one of my favorite action films, was Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this film um, really did extremely well at the box office. So now I'm going to go into the story, like a real quick um, synopsis of the story. Um, and as I said, there is a history between the villains of this film and Jor-El, who died when the planet of Krypton exploded. They were criminals, and in the end, he ended up placing these three villains. They are General Zod, Ursa, and Non. He ended up putting them into what's called a phantom or the phantom zone. When I was a kid, it creeped me out. I was like, "Oh man, you're really trapped. You're in prison." So they were put in like in this what it was like a square, and then they're thrown out into space in this square, and they can't escape from the phantom zone. They're caught, they're stuck in there, they can't get out. Creeped me out as a kid. It was kind of weird, but um because this was one of the first, definitely one of the first big science fiction films I had seen as a kid. This and the original Superman. um so anyways, there's a history between them. Now, um they end up breaking free from this Phantom Zone and wreak havoc on Earth, along with the assistance of Lex Luthor, who has escaped jail. So he's there to help them, so that they can get the better of Superman. Um, Now, just as strong as this storyline is the storyline of, and definitely I would say much more to me in the Richard Donner cut. It is just two uh, plots running together. Is the story of Lois Lane believing and then finding out who Superman is, and it is Clark Kent, and then this wonderful romance that blossoms, and how this is actually what Superman wants more than anything else is to fall in love and be with Lois Lane. So yeah, it's great. Now differences, I'll go through them and which ones I like better. And hey, as I said, I like the Richard Donner cut better, but there are things in the Richard Lester film that I really like that was not in the Donner version. Um, but anyways, for example, the three villains when they break out of the Phantom Zone um, in the Richard Donner cut, and this is what makes it marriage to the original Superman work so well, is when Superman throws the missile out into space that Lex Luthor had shot off. He throws that into space. It's that missile, when it explodes, it actually shakes free these three villains from the Phantom Zone. In the Richard Lester version, Lois Lane has been sent to Paris, France, and there's these terrorists that are wanting to blow up the Eiffel Tower. So Superman shows up, takes the bomb, and throws it into space, and the same thing happens. Personally, I like the Richard Donner version better. It, as I said, it connects to the original Superman so well. Um, Not to say the Lester version is bad because it's still good. And like many of the scenes in it, they are extended. It's got a bit of a longer runtime. Might be 10 minutes longer, maybe the Lester version, but there's definitely scenes that were added that were not in the Donner cut. And then in the Donner version as well, right after the credits, Lois Lane is thinking that Superman is Clark Kent right out of the chute. Where in the Lester version, there's the whole Paris, France thing going on. Um, from what I remember, where this like the whole romance thing is spearheaded right out of the credits. So um, and as I said, like I think I'd said, the Donner cut really plays more into the romance, although the Lester version does a good job with it, but it's more so in the Donner. And in the end, I find there's a lot less Clark Kent in the Donner version. There's more of Superman than Clark Kent, where some of the scenes I'm thinking of that Lester went over and put in, yeah, some of them were Superman, but some of them were Clark Kent as well. Scenes like in Niagara Falls, there was a lot added to that, um, as well as East Houston, which didn't involve Superman, but that was the villains. And I like those scenes really well, like just terrorizing this small town. Um, Now, as well, there was a scene where Lois Lane is trying to get Clark Kent to shake into Superman or show who he truly is. And she aims a gun at him and shoots. And then Clark Kent's like, well, you got me. I'm Superman. And she reveals that it was actually just a blank. So I like that. It was kind of, ooh, you fooled him. You fooled Superman there. But that's only in the Donner cut. Where in the Lester, version, it was he falls into a fireplace in Niagara Falls, and he's not burnt or hurt, which was okay as well, but better in the Donner version. So um, now I'm going to go over the acting in this film, and to me, no one does a bad job. Everyone is great in this film. Um, like to me, Christopher Reeve is Superman. He was a very, much like Richard Donner, a very underrated actor. And I think it may have all come down to this role. They thought of him as an action hero, a superhero, where when another film I have from 1980, Somewhere in Time, if you watch that, there's no action in that. He's really acting. It's drama going on, and he was a very good actor. Um, and I thought he was underrated, and he was great as Superman. And that's the role that people will remember him by the most, by far to me, would be Superman. And as I said, Richard Donner, very underrated director. He, along with Superman 1, I'm going to throw Superman 2 in there as well. He directed some very successful, successful, but also critically successful films like The Omen, all of the Lethal Weapon films, The Goonies. So those were huge flicks. But yeah, I don't hear many people talk about him and his work. And I thought he was a great director. And over the years, I've come to enjoy Superman more and more as I get older. And now, yeah, so Gene Hackman returns, and he's once again playing this over the top villain. Margot Kidder is fabulous, along with Reeves, in acting out the love story of the film, and she does a great job, really good job. Um, now, as well, um, E.G. Marshall, who's like in two scenes, I think, in this film. But I love him. He's a president of the United States. He's awesome. Um, both of his scenes that I remember, like where, and there are many scenes in this film that are just so memorable and I really enjoy. But where Zod and Ursa and Non come to the White House um, to make the president kneel before Zod and all his power because the three villains find out they have the same power as Superman. They're strong like him. They can fly. They can do everything that Superman can do. Um, so they're here to take over the world. So when they, you know, come to the president and have him actually kneel before him, he says, "There's one man that'll never do this." And Zod's like, "Who is this imbecile?" And later, the president is revealing to the world that this General Zod is here, and things are going to be a lot different on Earth. And then pleads to Superman to help the human race, help save us from General Zod. And those are great scenes, and Marshall plays it very straight, and he's a great actor. I remember him from Creepshow, 12 Angry Men, another film he did way back in the 50s with Henry Fonda. Um, but he's not in this very long, but he's memorable to me. E.G. Marshall is the president. As well, I wrote them down. Ned Beatty returns as Otis. I love that character. He's so stupid, but he's lovable, and he's a villain. He's great. He's not in it for very long, but he's with um, Lex in prison, and they escape uh, with the help of Miss Tessmacher, played by Valerie Perrine. Um, or Perrin, sorry. Um, she helps them, well, helps Lex escape jail. And then Jackie Cooper returns as Perry White, um, Clark's boss. And Clifton James even shows up as he did, and I don't know, is he actually playing the same character? J.W. Pepper, he played in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun, um, right from East Houston. Uh, so, so yeah, like the acting is great, and um, definitely with the villains, like with Jack O'Halloran, he was 6'6". He was a big man and wide. And whatever he would say to me, I would be like, "Yes, sir. No problem on that." He was a former boxer, in fact, but he's great in the role. He doesn't speak, but he's big. He's looming. He's he is that guy, and he's great in that role. Um, Sarah Douglas plays Ursa, and I find she is really portraying true evil, her character, and she truly enjoys inflicting pain on people, and she likes it a lot. She likes to smile at those wonderful things in life like that, and yeah, when I was a kid, she scared me. She was creepy. I would not go anywhere near her when I was a kid. I was like the look, the makeup, like the hair. The costumes were a little questionable for them. It was a little leather S&M-y, like, but um, it was creepy to me as a kid. So, and she was great in that role. And then finally, Terrence Stamp. I think he is outstanding as General Zod. He's not hamming it up at all. He's just way over the top, much like Hackman. Um, he's very like um, his performance. I would compare it to like if you were like overdoing Shakespeare or something. That's what he's doing. Um, but I think he's terrific in that role, and to me, that's the role I think I remember him the most as is General Zod. Um, Others may disagree, but to me, um, that's the role I remember him in the most. Might be is that. So he's awesome. Um, and I love the scene when Hackman reveals to Zod exactly who Superman is. He comes to find that there's a guy on Earth who's the son of our jailer. Well, we got to go after this guy. We need to have him kneel before Zod. Um, he's just single focused to get his revenge against Jor-El, even though he truly can't. Um, but he's single focused in doing so. Um, and I found it hilarious when Zod thought that Superman was Jimmy Olsen. I thought that was hilarious, and once again, that's only in the Donner cut. I thought that was very funny. Um, and Jimmy Olsen's played by Mark McClure, who was also in Back to the Future. He was in all four of the original Superman films, along with Reeve and Margot Kidder. I think were the and um, Jackie Cooper. I think they were the only four to be in all four of the Superman films. Um, Now, at the end of the Donner cut as well, Superman ends up destroying his home that he has up in the North Pole, um, which is where it's like his solace, where he goes. Um, and it's here where Brando um, talks to him and shares with him information, and also where Superman goes to um, lose his superpowers so that he can actually become human or like human, so that he can live and love and be with Lois Lane for the rest of his life. He does that in that home. Um, but it's then after learning of Zod, and um, it's a great scene because he like it's where E.G. Marshall is pleading for Superman to help them. Um, it's here that he fully understands what his job is, and his job is to help the humans on Earth, and those needs greatly outweigh his personal desires, unfortunately. So he cannot actually be with Lois Lane. So he comes to that realization and does get his superpowers back thanks to Jor-El. Um, and but in the end, he destroys the home, and it's definitely a signal or whatnot of him becoming complete and fully understanding himself and no longer needing this solace or this home away from home, like his actual um, home. And I apologize, I forget it's got a name where he goes. Um, but yeah, and then at the end of the film, Superman, as happened in the original Superman, flies around the Earth to turn back time. So all the bad stuff doesn't happen, and actually sending Zod, Ursa, and Non back into the Phantom Zone, back into space. Whereas in the Lester version, they fall down a crevice, or I think all three of them do, um, to their deaths after they lose their secret superpowers um, in Superman's home. But in the Donner version, he reverses time. Therefore, at the end of the film, it's like the beginning of the film where Clark Kent arrives late for work, and the only character that knows, or actually you could say went through all of this, was Superman or Clark Kent. He's the only one that knows any of this. He's the only one that knows who General Zod is. And these everyone else is clueless as to what actually happened and how close they all were to becoming slaves to Zod, the entire Earth. So, but anyways, I love this movie. I've watched it many times, and as well, Man of Steel was released in 2013, and I have not seen that film as of yet. But um, in looking at it, I see that the General Zod returns, so it may be sort of like a bit of a remake of this, maybe. But anyways, um, now I'm gonna do I'm gonna review part three and part four. I've been like bouncing around in my brain and like, okay, I'm gonna do Superman Returns and then watch Man of Steel as well. And I may, but I'm not gonna review them. I'm just gonna stick to the original series. So I'm not gonna do Supergirl either, because that was um, Superman's cousin, but it's like an offshoot of Superman. So I'll do Superman 2, 3, 4, and I hope to do a Superman for the original at some point when I get to that particular year. But yeah, so I'm going to do that. And then finally, I'll show you, I have actually all four of them on DVD here, one through four. There's not really much in the extras. I think each of the films may have a commentary on them, but it's not loaded with extras. But whatever, it's the films. That's really the big thing that you want. But anyways, um, so yeah, I'll next up I'm going to do Superman 3, and to let you know, I'm not so hot on the next two entries in the Superman series, but I'm gonna watch them and review them and share them with you. And anyways, I hope you have yourself an excellent day.